Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, addressing the dropout crisis one strategy at a time. Brought to you by the National Dropout Prevention Center Network with support from K-12 and Fuel Education and in partnership with Clemson Broadcast Productions. Good afternoon and welcome once again to Solutions to the Dropout Crisis. We have a real treat for you today. We are introducing a new resource, Solutions to the Dropout Crisis magazine. The Solutions magazine is a spin-off of our regular Solutions broadcast, but you'll notice that the new program has a much different purpose. The major difference is that our monthly Solutions webcast focuses on professional development. The magazine was created to raise awareness of the need for dropout prevention efforts. It's in a magazine format, so we can bring you a variety of stories with each episode. Today's webcast features two standalone 30-minute episodes. Our host for each is Dr. Sandy Addis, Director of the National Dropout Prevention Center Network. This first episode brings together the importance of community, research, and business to complement practitioners' efforts in preventing students from dropping out. Let's have a look.
Hi, I'm Sandy Addis, Director of the National Dropout Prevention Center. Welcome to Solutions Magazine. The National Dropout Prevention Center is pleased to present this program for you to learn more about the dropout crisis and, more importantly, to learn what is being done nationally to address it. When students drop out of school, their life options begin to disappear. These personal decisions have huge impact, not only on these young people, but also it affects their communities and their families. We all deal with the consequences of dropping out of school every single day. Why? Because dropping out of school leads to a less skilled workforce for the jobs of the 21st century. High dropout rates have always contributed to greater crime rates, drug use, and teen pregnancy, and even to increased health problems. We can prevent these outcomes by confronting these problems together. Dropout prevention needs to engage everyone. This program will put a spotlight on many of the solutions that schools, communities, individuals, businesses, and researchers are discovering to address this important challenge. In today's program, we will have 3 such stories. We will become acquainted with an educational business organization that bridges the gap between the requirements of the work world and the academic programming for disengaged students. Next, we will meet a university researcher dealing with these issues of sleep and why we need to pay close attention to this basic human need and how the lack of sleep often impacts the success of students. We will begin today with a community collaboration where one person's efforts foster a strong partnership between the faith community and the school district. Let's meet Reverend James Davis of Ware Shoals, South Carolina. Reverend Davis plays a pivotal role in ensuring that a small rural community sends a unified message to its students. Every student graduates. I think you'll be inspired. Reverend Davis, you just received an award that we give once a year in honor of a former governor and his wife, Governor Riley, and then he became Secretary of Education under the Clinton administration. So the Riley Award is a big deal to us, and in dropout prevention, it's a pretty big deal in South Carolina. Several years ago, you started to focus the youth ministry of your church, as I understand it, of Dunn Creek Baptist Church, on helping students to graduate. What did you do and how did that come about?
First of all, I'd like to say that I'm very humbled and honored to receive this award. And I got the impetus from you.
Well, thank you.
You came and spoke at our district meeting prior to the school year starting. And you said that we needed to have a motto for our city that would inspire young people to enter school and have the determination to graduate. And so I started implementing, everybody in Ware Shoals graduates. Then it kind of grew from there. And so when the school year started, I had a motto for my school bus. I drive Route 8, so I said,
all right, everybody, this is Bus 8. On bus 8, we be good, we be great, and we do what? All right there, good people.
And so we just kept those things up. And each morning, when my students get off the bus, whether at the primary, elementary, middle, or the high school, I give them a quote or something of inspiration to help them to go through the school day to keep on their minds.
Dunn Creek Baptist Church is a rural church outside of Ware Shoals, South Carolina, out in the countryside. And you did some things at the church too. You engaged some of the adults in this process. What else did you do at the church?
Well, first of all, I like to say that Ware Shoals is the biggest little city in South Carolina.
Okay.
And at Dunn Creek Baptist Church, we implemented what we call a back-to-school bash. And what we did was, if we're going to be a holistic ministry, we need to have everybody involved, just not the spiritual part, but education, a good secular education is what's needed to live in this world. So we invited people like guidance counselors. One year we invited the Principal Brown from the elementary middle school, because there was a transition in our school makeup. So she came and spoke to our students along with the parents that were there so that they could understand the transition. We have things such as student recognition days, where all the students who graduate that year and what awards they receive, what accomplishments they made, were they on the A/B honor roll, all A honor roll, that kind of thing. So we promote education in our church because it's very important, very important.
How did the adults react? You were encouraging the adults to support the kids. How did the adults react?
Well, it's very important because, first of all, it's your responsibility as an adult to see that your child receives a good education. It's the school's responsibility to make sure that there's a good educational environment. And so when children come home, it's important for the parent to make sure that the home is conducive for learning. When they get off the bus, I tell them,
Go in there and get you something to eat. Do your homework. Go outside and play. Go to bed early. Get up early and we'll do it all over again.
you have to inspire people. And a lot of times when I say that, the parent is standing right there.
Okay, great. Dr. Sprouse, you're the superintendent of a school district, and it's in many cases I've seen school systems say, well, you know, I sure hope the faith community does some good things, but we can't connect, we can't utilize them, and yet somehow you folks in Ware Shoals District 51 have managed to connect with the faith community, and they're doing a part and you're doing a part. Talk to us about how the school system has reacted. What have you seen?
Well, first of all, Reverend Davis is an influential leader, and he's doing a wonderful job of reaching out to the youth and to the parents, and it's just awesome to have him as a partner and as a member of our team. It is important for the faith community and schools to work together, and in a small town, many of us are leaders in the faith community, and so we make that connection. And as we learned with Clemson coming in and doing the assessment for our school, it's about changing the culture. It's not just about the school working by itself. We have to all come together to influence our youth and to implement programs such as Reverend Davis. Individuals working, groups working, all of us, school and community together, we can make a difference. And we're just appreciative that everyone has stepped up to the plate.
What a great story. Have you seen other adults in the community, maybe who weren't part of what Reverend Davis and Dunn Creek Baptist Church were doing, but have other adults sort of caught the spirit, if you will?
Absolutely.
Tell us about that a little bit.
Well, let's just talk about the bus drivers.
Okay.
He started his little thing with a bus driver with his students, and now we have other bus drivers who are making up slogans for their kids. So it has caught on. And yes, other adults in the community are seeing what's happening, and they're doing things as well. So we're very excited about that.
Right. I'm a school board member back home, and I know you have you and some of your members at Dunn Creek occasionally go to school board meetings to support what they're doing. Tell us about that.
Well, in order to bring about transformation, you got to have information. And the only way you can gather information is to be in the place where it's given. So we have, especially our brotherhood that's involved with our School Improvement Council. They attend, especially the president, Brother Reuben Hicks. We've attended the school board meetings just to gather information so that we can take it back to our church, let them know what is going on, so that you can be a part of the process of transformation. And that's so important. Without information, you can't do what's necessary to bring about change. So we thank the school system for opening their doors to allow us that opportunity to come in and be a part of that process.
That's a great thing to hear about, because in so many places there are adversarial status between school boards and community groups and that type of thing. And it sounds like what you all have done is mobilized a very positive acting community group from the faith community primarily to support what the school system's doing.
Well, I believe that in the area of education, we're all riding in the same boat. And if you punch a hole in the bottom of the boat, we'll all sink. So what we need to do, as one presenter I saw on yesterday, he said that we need to row together. And so we're just glad to be in the same boat with the school system, striving to get to the same destination.
What a great contribution. What I think I'm hearing is that through your leadership and the cooperation of the school system, the Ware Shoals community is changing the message that the kids hear from the adults about school importance. What a great thing. That's something that we have encouraged people to try, but we've seen very little people accomplish like you have. I want to thank both of you for your time today. Reverend Davis, congratulations on the Riley Award. Dr. Sprouse, congratulations on working with the faith community to prove that it can be done. To both of you, thanks for being here at the National At-Risk Youth Forum. One person indeed can be the catalyst for change. And with the team in Ware Shoals, the graduation rate in that district is increasing. Great job, Ware Shoals. We learn in our next segment that depriving teenagers of needed sleep is not supportive of their school's success. Dr. June Pilcher, professor of psychology here at Clemson University, has valuable information on sleep.
We're going to talk for a little while about sleep and the need adolescents have for sufficient sleep to thrive. I think the interesting thing is to start with the research. I think as academics, we always start with the research. And why would the American Academy of Pediatrics have concerns about this? Because they talk about health issues. So what can you share with us about your research and others?
I think that one of the things that's going on is when we're talking about schools and the school start times, we've become quite aware that adolescents actually go through a physiological change. And the physiological change, in addition to just puberty, is also related to their circadian rhythms. And circadian rhythms are the 24-hour-a-day rhythms that we're really forced to by our sun. And the sun keeps us on a 24-hour day, and it does a pretty good job of that as long as we're regularly sleeping at night and being awake during the day. And for most of us as adults, we very quickly develop the habit to go to bed at, say, midnight, get up at 7 or something like that. And we develop that habit very rapidly. What we've seen in teenagers is that their desire to stay awake, and we all have that desire to stay awake longer, but their desire to stay awake longer is very strong. They have what we call a delay in the rhythm, and that means they want to sleep later in the morning, and that's where we start to run into issues with them. It's not so much that this is somehow harming their health. This is natural for them. This is what their body is telling them to do. What they have trouble with is then getting up, being alert to drive a car, for example, or of course going to school and being alert in school as well.
So the real impact as far as their health would be what? I think, it's not just they want to sleep later. They need to sleep later just because of that whole shift. And they need, just like all of us, a certain number of hours of sleep to perform optimally.
Right.
Yeah.
And, of course, teenagers Really, I think that the scientists, the pediatrics, we recommend, at least 8 to 9 hours, and that's probably rare for many teenagers.
Oh, yes.
They're probably not sleeping that much, but their bodies, many of them still need it. And that's even true up into the college-age student as well. Many college students need to sleep that extra hour, even though they often don't. Their body is telling them to sleep. And so the downsides of that is then that they're less alert all day, they're less capable of functioning as well as they could if they were sleeping regularly. And that includes things like memory, consolidating and storing memories, and just straight up alertness and vigilance and focus, the ability to pay attention to whatever the topic is that perhaps they're trying to study in school. For many years now, we've been recommending that basically delay the start time for high schools in comparison. So maybe have the earlier years, the grammar schools, the middle school children, go to school first and then have the high schoolers start later. Even starting as late as 8:30, even an hour delay, 8:30 or maybe 9-ish, will have a powerful impact on the high school students. And there are a number of studies that show that the students, even with just an hour delay, they're basically sleeping that extra hour, and it makes them that much more alert. They perform better on tests, they have better moods, they're less irritable, that type of thing.
Yeah, I think that's good that you bring up that there are studies that are showing that this has a difference, because I think intuitively we know this.
Right.
We know this. We've all been there, and we know what it's like. So the fact that you've got studies to back up this later starting time for high school students is something we want to put a spotlight on today.
Right.
And so, I mean, I was sharing with you earlier, my son has a family of 4 children, ranging in age at one time from 4 to 17. And interestingly, the older ones have to be dragged out of bed to get to that 7 o'clock bus.
Right.
Meanwhile, the younger ones are tearing around the house, raring to go long before that, and they don't have to be at school till 9 o'clock.
Right.
Now, there's something here that's not logical, and we're not matching up the needs with the setup. And I think the American Academy of Pediatrics is making the point that perhaps we need to revisit this. And I know there are logistical questions. So the recommendations are based on what's best for the child. And, as a psychologist, there's many things that are going on in young people's lives that we can't change.
Right.
That we can't change. And it's like family situations, poverty situations, all kinds of things. But here is something that we can modify.
Right.
And so it takes a will to do that kind of thing. So what can we have a bottom line here about what we recommend? And it's probably, if the research says this, what can we do as communities and school districts to match up what makes sense?
Right. And I think there are some school districts that are doing this for sure, but more could do it, where basically I think the recommendation is pretty straightforward. When you're setting up your school start times, have the younger children start first and then delay that high school start time. And many school districts say they have trouble with the bus schedules and things like that because they have to use the same buses. They're making multiple rounds, which all makes sense. But I would again say, so have the high schoolers be the last ones that are picked up. Have the buses make the round for the earlier children, the younger children, and then have the high schoolers be the last ones picked up with the latest starting time. And within reason, I would delay that starting time as long as possible. Maybe at least to 8:30, 9-ish, 9:30, and then have them going, of course, later in the day as well. And again, the school bus is then running in the afternoons to take the children back home. Many school districts are starting to do this. There are some that are doing this, but I suspect there's still many more that are not. And so I think it's to me, it seems like a fairly simple change to make that could directly impact in a positive way the high school students. Just giving them an extra hour to sleep every day, though. Every day, that's an extra hour to sleep. That adds up.
That adds up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the things that I'm sure we've heard stories about students falling asleep in their desks and all kinds of things like that. There's a lot of things here. We need to pay attention to the naturalness of a human being, their need for sleep, being an adolescent, probably the need for more sleep as they're growing, and kind of thinking about what can we do to take advantage of what we know,
Right.
and we're seeing his works.
Right.
And so at Solutions here today, we've wanted to just put a spotlight on something that you might haven't thought about. And I appreciate June bringing her expertise and the knowledge that there is a research base behind this to pursue this and learn more about sleep and adolescence, school starting times, and maybe we'll make a difference with a lot of lives.
I hope so.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me. It was kind
Thank
of
you
an
very
interesting
much. I enjoyed
chit-chat.
it.
Nice
Yes.
way to start the day.
Yes, thank you.
Plenty of food for thought from Dr. Pilcher. Making research-based decisions is always a wise approach. It takes businesses identifying the skills they need in the workplace and students seeing relevance in what they're learning to create success in career-based education. We're pleased to introduce you to Win Learning, an organization that provides curriculum and resources to meet the 21st century needs. Here's Teresa Chastain, CEO of Win Learning.
I started Win Learning. I'm a former educator, teacher, and then a college professor for many years, and thought if there was a way that we could give students an opportunity to see relevance in education, that we would put the tools together, and we've done that. So we teach students to do things that they would need to do in the workplace. We have a whole series of foundational skill courses, but we also have soft skills courses, because I think sometimes we take for granted whether students have the role models that show them good work behaviors in the workplace. And so it teaches them things like being at work on time, attendance, those important things of teamwork, getting along with one another, and things that we all know to do, but not all students might know how to do.
I know the products of Win Learning are very adapted to the individual student. They're individualized. They may be found on the student's personal device. Tell us what that might look like from the student's point of view.
Absolutely. So we're embedded into a lot of state programs. If you're unemployed, you log into the unemployment system and you have to go through our program. So just like students, you would take a pre-assessment. It will prescribe the courses that you need according to that assessment. You'll take a post-assessment and get a credential based on that. And so the student also has something to show at the end. We also have a number of career exploration tools that let them say what their interests are and what they want to be, and then puts them in the correct courseware to fit for that.
Dr. Chastain, I know that we're involved with Win Learning and in a particular project through the Toyota Foundation that has funded our carrying out some of the Win Learning products and services in states like Mississippi and Kentucky and New York. What are those products like for kids?
Well, it gives a common language for education to talk to employers. And so there's a metric that they can see that these are the skills that the students will have when they get out. Toyota was so happy to fund the project, as you know, and so $1.5 million for the National Dropout Prevention Center to do this project. And it gets students thinking about what they can do when they graduate. And Toyota wants to employ those students that have the skills. They get reading for information, applied math, they get locating information, all those things that you have to do in work. So it's kind of academics in an applied context.
We've been very fortunate at the National Dropout Prevention Center for Win Learning to partner with us to help try to raise graduation rates around the country. Why would a provider like Win Learning want to partner with the National Dropout Prevention Center?
Well, it's the work we do, and quite honestly, for me, it's personal. I should have been a dropout. I grew up in poverty. I was a free lunch kid. My dad was a disabled veteran. He died when I was a teenager and left 5 of us for a mom to raise. And due to programs like yours, we've all been able to graduate not only from high school, but from college, from graduate school. And Win just crossed the $100 million mark. And so to be able to run a company when I should have been a dropout is amazing. And it's because of the work like you do.
Wow, that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. As CEO of Win Learning, what's your day like? What do you do every day?
Oh, all kinds of things. I travel around the country. I feel like I get to do missionary work and get paid to do it. And so we affect millions of lives and raise the standard of living for them, both in their community and in their work life.
Tell me about a success story where Win Learning has provided something and students have shown increases in gains.
Well, we have several on our website that you can look at, but one that always comes to mind is a student named Philip that was in West Virginia. And he had gotten into a little bit of trouble, had to go into a juvenile justice program for a while, then got out, and he started sneaking into school. And he would sneak in and sit in and wasn't supposed to be there, but they put him on the WIN program. And in starting to do that, he ended up graduating and then going on to college. We hear thousands of those stories every day.
What a great story. Thank you, Dr. Chastain. Win Learning is obviously a great partner for the National Dropout Prevention Center and a great asset for educators around the country and most importantly for students. Dr. Chastain, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
It's really gratifying to see a committed business organization not only providing resources that enable students to graduate, but also giving them the marketable skills they need to provide for themselves and their families. At the National Dropout Prevention Center and Network, we believe that there are multiple effective strategies for dropout prevention. In each of our programs, we'll introduce you to new ways of looking at dropout prevention, with practitioners and researchers sharing what they have learned that can make a difference. We invite you to learn even more about dropout prevention on our website, dropoutprevention.org, and to get involved by joining the National Dropout Prevention Network to combat this critical issue. After all, our mission is to increase graduation rates through research and evidence-based solutions. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time on Solutions to the Dropout Crisis magazine.
I hope you enjoyed our first episode and will want to share it with your community. Bringing together different groups who all have the same goal, dropout prevention, means that more people see more results. I wanted to be sure to mention that the National Dropout Prevention Center hosts a number of conferences throughout the year to do just that, bring like-minded people together. The goal is to bring people together from all across the country to capitalize on dropout prevention initiatives. Information on all our conferences is available at dropoutprevention.org. The second magazine episode addresses the need for trauma-informed instruction in schools. It's no secret that today's students face more and different challenges than previous generations. This episode is really powerful. So let's turn to the next episode where we join Dr. Sandy Addis once again as he brings together speakers at a recent conference with the theme of trauma-informed instruction.
Thank you and welcome to Solutions Magazine. Students don't always come to school ready to learn, but the reasons are often varied and beyond their control. They may have witnessed violence. They may be experiencing abuse. They may not have food in their home. They may not even have a home. The unfortunate fact is that students come to school from less than ideal situations. By becoming better informed, we can also meet students' needs so that they are more likely to stay in school and to graduate. Today we will look at 4 segments. First, we'll identify trauma and define it. Second, we'll see what happens to many teens who try to deal with trauma by acting out. Third, we'll present a solution that offers hope by identifying one way to meet traumatized youth's needs. Fourth, we'll examine one person's story from a life of trauma to success. Let's begin now by defining trauma.
The experience of trauma and neglect is very difficult to define. As we become more sophisticated, the definitions of trauma and neglect are getting better. There's acute trauma, and acute trauma is typically a one-time event. It could be a victim of a crime, sexual assault, it could be a natural disaster, and that's acute trauma. And then there's chronic trauma. And chronic trauma, people who experience chronic trauma are experiencing abuse and neglect over and over and over again. Unfortunately, there are children who experience sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse over and over again. the earlier the chronic trauma begins, the more harmful that trauma is to the child's developing brain. And then there is complex trauma, and it's also being called developmental trauma. Complex trauma or developmental trauma is trauma that begins at an early age, and it's chronic trauma that begins at an early age. And usually, unfortunately, and what makes it complex is trauma or neglect that is perpetrated at the hands of somebody who should be caring for that child. A father or a mother, or a father or mother who fails to protect their child, or an aunt or uncle who is perpetrating sexual abuse on a child. The fact that it's the family member, somebody who should be protecting that child, makes it even more complex. And that alone, by the definition, implies certain characteristics of trauma that can be detrimental to the child, to the developing brain. One of the most important studies that is beginning to get more traction and more attention is the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. That study resulted from a partnership from Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control out of Atlanta. Dr. Folletti from Kaiser Permanente was running a weight loss clinic, a weight loss intervention in San Diego out of an HMO, basically, a family practice. And it was a pretty significant intervention they were doing to help people lose weight. And what was interesting was he noticed that people who were benefiting the most from the study were dropping out. And they were able to track down some of those folks. And what they found was many of them had adverse childhood experiences. And there are 10 adverse childhood experiences that they studied these 14,000 people from Kaiser Permanente and asked them about their childhoods, and they came up with 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences. And the long and short of it is what they've discovered was the more adverse childhood experiences you have as a child growing up, the more likely you're going to have more difficulty as an adult from an emotional standpoint, a medical standpoint, and overall quality of life. That is probably the most significant study that has come out in recent years to speak to the effects of abuse and neglect. Our treatment approaches are switching from not what has the child done, what bad behaviors has the child done, but what have they been through. And we need to really learn about the effects of trauma and neglect on the child's developing brain. The brain develops in a use-dependent way, meaning that the more one uses or one has to use certain neurological connections, the more you're going to rely upon those neurological connections. The child's stress response system, our stress response system, begins developing at conception. And if that child's brain is growing in an environment that is surrounded by drugs and stress and poor nutrition, that child's stress response system is going to be underdeveloped. And as the child grows, the brain continues to grow. And as that child goes through certain experiences, the brain is going to reflect that child's experiences. The brain develops from the bottom up, inside out. The higher up in the brain we go, the more complex those functions are. The lower into the brain we go, the more automatic and simple those functions are. But what's important to remember is that the higher up in the brain you go, the more plastic it is. So it is changeable. The brain is changeable. There is help and there is hope. I think it's really important that mental health professionals, educators really begin to understand the impact of trauma and neglect on the child's developing brain.
Fortunately, as Mr. Paxton notes, our brain's plasticity means that trauma's effects may not be permanent. There is hope, he says. But what happens when no one recognizes that acting out, sometimes even in a criminal way, is a form of dealing with trauma? Let's learn from someone all too familiar with what can happen when young people act out.
Once trauma has begun, what can the end results be from your experience?
As far as trauma is concerned and what the end results when trauma happens to children is very dramatic and devastating. Kids, we have to remember, come to kindergarten, many of them from living in poverty, and they are dealing with the trauma that's associated with poverty. And it's not just poverty, but they come to kindergarten and you have teachers who are there with smiling faces, all lit up, embracing all these kids, ready to teach them the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, all right? But unfortunately, that doesn't happen as time goes on. The old adage that education's a great equalizer is not true. I mean, kids who come from poor neighborhoods are 2 to 3 years behind their more affluent counterparts, and they never catch up. Because what's happened in many of our education systems, and it's really a very naive perspective, that education is the great equalizer, that will overcome their trauma, but they're not even thinking trauma. They don't even recognize that. Instead, what they see are kids who are misbehaving, and they're misbehaving because of that childhood trauma. And so what happens is that school systems respond by punishing the behavior, and without asking the question, why is the child behaving this way? In essence, what happens is that the kids are speaking, they are talking, but they're not verbalizing it, what the underlying causes of their behavior, their trauma, whether it be family violence, drug-addicted parents, shootings, deaths in their family, all those things that are associated with poverty. Instead, they are speaking with their behavior. They act out, okay? But what we do is we have systems across this country that respond to the behavior. They treat the behavior with punishers, and we don't take the time to look at the underlying causes. And so as time moves on, and especially in the adolescence, and the brain is developing more, and kids reach puberty, and we all know, you know, the old adage about teenagers, okay, and how rebellious that they can be, and then the teenage brain and how that functions with the frontal lobe, and it translates emotional logic, but it's not developed till age 25. But you throw on top of that, for those kids who've been going all these years still dealing with their trauma and are now acting out in their teenage years, but now it's in delinquent ways. Okay, and so then they find themselves referred, especially because of zero tolerance policies in our schools, arrest them and refer them to the juvenile court. Now they're introduced to a criminal justice system. And the research shows, you know, that kids who are arrested on campus are twice as likely not to graduate, and if they appear in court, they're 4 times as likely not to graduate. So that's your school to prison pipeline. And so then they end up dropping out. And we know that most of our adult inmates in prison did not graduate high school. And this is the reason why. This is how we get to where we are today, okay? With an ineffective criminal justice systems across the country. We're scratching our head because we're still so stuck on punishment, without slowing down and taking the time and being a little bit more inconvenient with ourselves to say, hey, wait a minute, okay? Why is this happening? And we're not doing it early enough in children's lives, because from birth to kindergarten, things are happening. And we need to stop thinking that when kids come to us in kindergarten, get off that bus on the first day of school, that they're coming with us with a tabula rasa, okay, a blank slate, that we're ready to fill those minds with wonderful things, when in fact they don't come to us with a blank slate. They come to us with perceptions, feelings, and emotions that have already been molded by bad things that have happened to them. And we need to stop and figure that out.
What things can we do to address being able to help the children before they get to you?
It requires a community collaborative approach. It requires that all the stakeholders be at the table. But here's the thing, the reason why that doesn't happen often is because you have to find the champion or champions in your community that's going to convene the people to do that, okay? And it's a situation like, you know, the whole chicken and egg dilemma, which came first, the chicken or the egg, all right? So when everyone's operating in their own silo, the education system, the juvenile justice system, law enforcement, I mean, they're all respecting their own rules and regulations, their own agency objectives, and they never get a chance to step back and step outside that and look at things globally and realize, hey, wait a minute, it's really our disconnect, our lack of communicating with one another that is perpetuating, you know, the trauma for these kids and the lack of fixing the system to prevent it. So, for example, in 2003, I just elected myself to be the champion. And I just asked the stakeholders to come together, the school superintendent, the chief of police, the district attorney, and so forth. You know, the nice thing about being a judge is that, you know, when you call people to meet, out of respect for my position, they're going to come. And, you know, I just kept, you know, insisting that we keep meeting, and we kept meeting. And over a period of time, we were able to hammer out a different system, counterintuitive as it may be, okay? But it was one that, first of all, said, we're going to create this foundation first, and that is that we are going to stop arresting all these kids. Then we'll start setting up the walls, okay? We're going to create, in lieu of these arrests, what are going to be responses that are educational, that are positive, because, you know, rewards or positive reinforcers outweigh negative ones 4-to-1 in modifying behavior. Then we said, okay, now, you know, once we do that, there are going to be those kids that are not going to respond positively even to your regular educational type of programs that you put in place of arrest and suspensions. Those are going to be your chronically disruptive kids. Those are the ones who have clinical needs and clinical issues, so they need more serious services. And so we went to the next level, and we created an independent backbone agency that brokers all those providers. And now there's a bridge between the school system and the community, where the school system refers those chronically disruptive kids who otherwise they can't service. They don't have the resources to do that. But now we broker the community to do that. Here's the thing. You have to keep in mind, okay, that the best approach will be to go as early in age as possible. In Clayton County, we're in all the middle schools right now. The next step is to go to elementary schools. But eventually one day, sometime in the future, maybe after my retirement, but the plan is there, that we want to be in the birthing room of our local hospital, because that's where it really should start.
Judge Teske recognizes that many teens cry for help by acting out. He galvanized a community to meet the real needs of young people, needs resulting from trauma. What happens, though, when there is no Judge Teske? Our next segment examines one former professional basketball player's outreach to gang members.
But you work closely with youth, and you work closely with youth who are emotionally wounded, youth who've been traumatized either physically or emotionally by either abuse or neglect. And specifically, you work with gangs, real gangs.
Yes.
So tell me, how did you get from playing basketball to being a gang leader?
Well, Lynn, thank you for asking me and showing interest in what I do. Being a professional athlete, we know that we have great influence on the younger generation. We become heroes and icons. And one of the things when I retired from basketball, I was wondering what I was going to do in my retirement. Many of us try to hang on a little too long, as Michael Jordan even found out when he went to Washington. But I went back to the community of which I met my wife back in Eastover. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. Came up in a single-parent home with my two siblings, and we were struggling with just trying to find an identity, how to avoid those issues of gang violence and drug-infested environments. And the only way I knew how to do it was get involved with extracurricular activity like basketball. And through that sport, got an opportunity to escape the streets of Baltimore, the mean streets of Baltimore, and went off to the University of South Carolina, where I started as an athlete for 4 years. And then once I completed my time there, went on to play professional basketball with the Charlotte Hornets, and even traveled the world in 7 different countries, and learned that the world was huge. And we could make a difference when we came back and invested time in it through the sport that blessed me.
Did you have a mentor who worked with you, someone that you felt close to, that you could point to and say, this person made a difference in my life?
Well, if you eliminate mom, because mom was the pillar and the staple of our family. But my mentors were coaches, people in the recreation center, teachers. My father was not involved in our life, so it was the neighborhood adults who cared about everybody's kids. So I could just say every male who's been involved in my life had some impact, but the greatest impact was through the sport of basketball. Being awkward, taller than all my friends and all, I got teased a lot when I was a kid, but when I became good at basketball, you go from being that ugly duckling to a beautiful swan that people idolize. And it did give me a sense of importance and value, and it did expose me to greater things that said I could achieve some great things. Becoming a professional athlete, playing in the NBA, arguably the best basketball in the world, and traveling the world, people idolize you. They want your autograph, and they want to take pictures with you, and you get a sense that you were somebody. And I took full advantage of it and started being a positive influence on young people who I've had opportunities to meet.
Tell us briefly just about some of your experiences and how you can apply what you've learned to helping others.
What I found is going back into the grassroots of working in the recreation centers and the communities, that a lot of the kids are often at homes without adults or being raised by the streets. I escaped it, but there are many who don't. And getting involved with gangs have different reasons, some for protection, others for provision, others just a sense of belonging. Being in a gang is not illegal, but the activities are.
Okay.
And so once you realize that they are people also, all you got to do is look beyond their faults and see their needs. And their need is to feel validated or important. That's what the gangs offer them, a sense of they belong to something, and then they kind of bring them in, but then turn them out to do some illegal activity. My work is basically giving them what they want, and that's attention. Secondly, be a fisherman. Many of our young African American in the streets, they like to play basketball. So I created an opportunity for them to play basketball, but first only after they go to a Bible study.
Okay.
So I give them something, they give me something. They spend an hour of Bible study, and I speak in layman's terms about Christianity and who God is and what He could do for them. And then in exchange, they get to play as much basketball as they can stomach. And we build a relationship through that, and obviously we've had a great impact on gang members who come. They do not argue, cuss, fuss, or fight during that time, though they got to go back to that environment where they have to be tough enough to survive. But while they're there, one testimony has been that this is the most peaceful time they get on a Wednesday night when they're at Bible study. One started off, if I may say, wanting to just play basketball, didn't want the Bible study. But after coming several times over a year time, he now don't come to play basketball, but he just come for the ministry. So there was a transformation. Start off by saying, Coach, are you having basketball tonight? To now, Coach Dozier, it's ministry tonight.
Oh, wow.
So I've seen a great transformation in him, and now I want to commission him to bring other gang members to the same thing where they can actually see a better way.
How did you initially gain their trust? How did you get them to believe in what you were doing to be able to reach out to them?
It's a true statement. We got to be able to face the truth of what creates gang membership. That means there's a lack of something. And then we got to look at how they're successful at recruiting. You might not like it, but they got some method that's working. So maybe we need to adopt what they do. What is it that they're doing, and give those who are considering or on the fence an alternative to the gangs. And most times it's because they need some type of protection or safety net as opposed to the struggle that they're having in their natural environment.
Yeah. How would you describe the youth that you work with?
We all experience some type of trauma. It's not the issue of experiencing it, it's how you actually respond to them. Many of them feel trapped. You know, the creed for gang membership is blood in, blood out. So there's no way to get out other than you have to give up some skin, if not your life.
Okay.
So some of them are trapped, but then we have to be advocates and also support group that if they do, we encourage them to get out, where are we going to take them? But there is hope. I believe if you can convince them that being a member of a gang is not criminal, but the activities are, and if you can get to the head and convince them, then maybe you can transform them from the top down. And I've already had success in a few members that have made a decision that they want to give up their flag and take up the mission of helping others to find a better way.
Terry Dozier uses his credibility as a former professional basketball player to reach those that some may consider unreachable. His example is inspirational. A mentor, a friend, a listening ear can all impact a young person very positively. Our next segment speaks to the power of positive mentors.
Would you describe yourself as a wounded student? Would you describe yourself as being traumatized, either emotionally or physically? I know you're a successful businessman now. You're someone that we all look up to. But looking back in your past, will you tell us a little bit about your past and how would you describe yourself?
Well, thank you, Lynn, for saying that I have a successful business, and it's a success mainly because, you know, people have given me opportunity. Without opportunity, I would be nowhere, so thank you so much. And, you know, when I think and look back in retrospect in terms of my childhood, you know, I had a mother that was a school teacher and a father that was worked for a technical research center, General Foods, actually. And so I came from a two-parent household, so you wouldn't necessarily think that I fit the criteria of somebody that might be a wounded student, but you never know. And so I went to an all-white high school, junior high school, and elementary school at a time when we weren't as racially diverse or educated about race or how people feel about race. So I went into an environment where I was called a lot of names, where I was ostracized, where it became an uncomfortable place or an environment for me where I kind of dreaded going to school. And that led me into all kinds of antisocial behavior, and certainly led me not to being a good student because I was more concerned about what was going on in terms of how people were dealing with me and the color of my skin as opposed to the curriculum that was being administered. When you go into a school environment, you've got, you know, 30, 40, 50 kids, you know, calling you names, you know, making fun of you for being black. It's psychologically, you know, it becomes something that's turmoil in your life. And so school became an experience where I really just wasn't, you know, fitting in. So I found all kinds of extracurricular things to do that got on everybody's nerves that escalated into me eventually not graduating from school. I went on to get my GED and then went on to attend Northwestern University with the help of my grandmother, who was a retired school teacher. And again, I'm going back to the help and encouragement I got from people. The greatest gift of all is the gift of encouragement. But certainly I was a wounded student. Wounded, and it was an emotional wound. And I didn't have people, because back then we didn't talk about that. We didn't even talk about at-risk youth 20 years ago, 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, people started talking about at-risk youth. Now we're talking about the wounded student. Why does someone become at risk? Why are they at risk of doing anything? Somewhere in the dynamic of their life is probably a wound or something that happened to them. It might be a parent that they didn't have. It could be a sexual, something that happened to them sexually that shouldn't have happened, or it could be, you know, psychological. You know, we don't know. But the wounded student, and when we find out people have wounds, then the sooner we identify that, then perhaps we can stop them or intervene before they become at risk. You know, unfortunately, I ended up in prison twice. And, you know, the United States has more people incarcerated than any country in the world. So I went to prison originally for an armed robbery ring that I had. Never, you know, integrating myself into society in a way. So a lot of things that started when I was in high school, antisocial behavior, like starting my own newspaper, running away from home, escalated into this, you know, mass, you know, type of criminal behavior, which landed me in prison twice. And so while I was in prison, the last time I decided to write a book, and the name of my book is A Breed Apart, published by Simon & Schuster, and it chronicles my journey from, you know, being a young person in school to being a teenager to running away from home, ending up in prison, and how I turned that around, and the people who helped me, and the lessons learned along the way. So I've been out of prison now for over 20 years. And as I say that to offer hope for millions of Americans and their families, black, white, Hispanic, you know, or what have you, who have someone in their family who are locked up. And again, the greatest gift in the world is the gift of encouragement. Without people examining this subject matter, looking and delving into people's lives and asking why did they do a particular thing. Recently in Orlando, there was a mass murder, the biggest mass murder in the history of the United States by gun, and only paling in comparison to 9/11. And so when we look and delve into that young person's life, elementary school teachers, junior high school teachers, alternative teachers have identified and said, hey, look, there was something wrong with this young man. We could see that there were some problems, but nobody knew really how to reach him. And so many of the people who go off to commit some of these heinous things across the country, where we're all aghast when we see it on the news, a lot of it, in my opinion, could be prevented if there were more people who were interested in examining why they're behaving in a certain way in the first place before it gets to that point. Because I'm under the belief that a lot of people need a kind word and a hug can stop a lot of confusion that we have. And administrators and teachers are starting to really look and try to understand, what do we do with a young kid in a school who's behaving in a way that's disrupting? It's disrupting the class, it's disrupting the school. 20 years ago, you might have had one kid. Somebody might have said, oh, that's Steve McCallahan. He's always in trouble. Now we've got hundreds of children in one school, and we can't just shove them all off into alternative schools. And now we've learned we can't just house everybody in prison either, because they come back into society. And if they haven't gotten their wounds or gotten the issues that brought them there in the first place under control, then they're destined to repeat that behavior. And fortunately for Victor Woods, I was able to be indoctrinated with some good people who had some progressive ideas, and were able to look at some of the things that I did wrong and find some, if you will, brilliance in some of the things I did wrong, but wanted to help me redirect that. Because just because somebody has been abused, molested, or has experienced some terrible trauma in their life, there's a way to come to grips with that, a way to accept that. You can forgive, but you can't forget. But to take those feelings and take those experiences and then join them together and put them on a productive track to being successful. And that has been what I have tried to express and share with people across the country.
Victor Woods' words resonate. No one knew how to reach the killer. It could have been prevented, as a powerful testimony to the value of understanding trauma and its effects. That's it for Solutions Magazine today. I'm Sandy Addis at the National Dropout Prevention Center. See you next time.
Such important information for all of us. And if you'd like to learn more about trauma-informed instruction, you might like to come to our conference in Orlando in June 25th to 28th. And like all our conferences, registration is open on our website. I hope you've enjoyed today's webcast and Solutions Magazine, our new resource to raise awareness community-wide for dropout prevention. Please let us know your thoughts. We always look forward to your feedback on all our webcasts. Next month, we'll resume our regular professional development webcasts in this time slot, so make sure to tune in. Thank you for joining us today, and see you next month for another edition of Solutions to the Dropout Crisis.